What is happening now, tensions that are building up in Europe, is US and NATO's fault every step of the way. Russia was forced to respond at every step. The situation kept worsening and worsening, deteriorating and deteriorating at every step. And here we are today, in a situation where we're forced to resolve it somehow. We can't allow the situation that I mentioned, NATO's further expansion eastwards.
Joining me now is the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, Peter Zalmayev, who joins us now live from Kiev. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program. It's a pleasure having you once again. Now, Putin said that Russia will respond adequately to any Western aggression and, of course, would develop its army further. What do you think that response would look like?
Well, first of all, let's consider what that aggression would be. Obviously, Ukraine has felt insecure precisely because Russia annexed Ukraine's territory, contrary to what the previous speaker was saying. Russia has been interested in recreating some sort of a former Soviet empire in the shape and form of the Crimea, and the frozen conflict in Transnistria and in Georgia, etc. It's creating these very unsafe, insecure spots around on the periphery of its territory, and it is no surprise that Ukraine has felt that it needed NATO's protection. So Putin, in fact, has invited that sort of feeling and the momentum in Ukraine by himself, pretty much. In terms of what his response would be to, I think, very much unrealistic demands that he's placed on NATO, anything you can imagine. I mean, starting with a full invasion of Ukraine, which I think is very unlikely. But once again, in 2014, very few people thought that the annexation of Crimea was likely. I think it's more likely that there'll be some kind of combination of cyber and limited military offensive. Putin has tried his hands already very successfully in meddling in Ukrainian cyber infrastructure. So any military action would be preceded probably by a wholesale attack on Ukraine's cyber defenses and critical infrastructure. I think also a much more narrowly defined, I think Russia's goal in Ukraine is to provide Crimea with fresh water, something that Ukraine has obviously been an obstacle to. So we're talking about possibly a land corridor along the north of the Azov Sea to the Crimea, which would involve conquering further territory in the east of Ukraine.
Right. And do you think that the EU and the West will continue to put pressure on Russia with sanctions, which is essentially what Ukraine wants at this stage?
Well, when you say the EU and the US, that's a big if, because first of all, consider the wording and the addressee of Putin's ultimatum. He did not address NATO per se. He did not address other European powers. He talked directly to and addressed directly the U.S. And President Biden, which makes which makes it obvious that Vladimir Putin wants to be considered on par with the U.S., the way that the Soviet Union was engaged in a two-power rivalry with the United States. So Biden, in fact, is now claiming that no negotiations can proceed without consultations with Western European partners. So that will be determined very soon. But Biden is aware of the very real possibility of military action against Ukraine, and already Lavrov made a statement that early next year, two sides will be sitting down and talking and trying to find some kind of common ground. So far, the Western powers have ruled out, actually have not ruled out any potential sanctions. And the one big sanction that they have threatened, or at least hinted at, would be disconnecting Russia from the SWIFT financial payment system, which will not cause the downfall of Vladimir Putin, but will be very, very hurtful for Russia's economy.
Right. And what would also be very hurtful to Russia's economy would be cutting off the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. And they actually halted operations when Russia sent its military personnel to the border with Ukraine. They halted operations for a very short amount of time. Do you think that was an indirect message to Russia from the EU?
I think it was, and when it comes to the Nord Stream 2, you're correct. It will be unpleasant for Russia, but I think it will not be a do or die moment. The very rationale behind Nord Stream 2 was to cut Ukraine out of the equation so that Ukraine can lose upwards of $1.5 billion a year in transit fees. So that's a kind of a retaliatory tactic against Ukraine. And it is very, very also, Russia understands it's a very lucrative thing for Germany. So it is tying Germany closer to Russia and making it much more difficult for Europeans to find a consensus against Russia. And that's why it was, the project was started in the first place.
You mentioned cyber attacks on Russia's part and minimal amounts of military action along the border. What would be the red line for more sanctions to be imposed on Russia by either the US or even the EU?
Well, the New York Times came out with a very long article just yesterday, precisely on this potential scenario, and it's very complicated. I wish I had a clear answer for you, because cyber attacks, unlike military attacks, military invasions, give you plausible deniability. Russia has never claimed participation in any of these attacks, even though it's clear to most when it is Russia that is involved. So it is very unclear when and if sanctions will be applied in the case of a cyber attack. But Western cybersecurity specialists are monitoring the situation, and they're confident that they will be able to know when and if Russian attackers strike. Biden has hinted that that will involve some sort of sanctions, but no one is saying what those sanctions will be.
All right, the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, Peter Zalmayev, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the NewsHour.